Hello everyone, we're here in what we call my grandmother's room. And I say my grandmother, this is Ruth Graham. And behind every great man there's a great woman. My granddaddy's always said that. Matter of fact, there would be no Billy Graham if there was not a Ruth Graham. She was by his side all the time, sometimes not physically, but always spiritually and emotionally. She was taking care of the family while he traveled. Sometimes they were gone for months and months and months at a time, all right? You're talking about over 3, 4, almost 6 months at times. He was gone, especially in the early days because there were no planes. You had to go by boat. So it takes a while to get across the world in a boat sometimes. But anyway, I want to show a few things from my grandmother's. A lot of people don't realize my grandmother was born in China. That's what you see this background behind me. It's like, what in the world's that? You think you're eating at a Chinese restaurant or something. No, but she did love Chinese food. We ate Chinese food all the time. Before it was even a fad, we were eating Chinese food. We love fried rice. My grandmother would cook some of the best fried rice. She did not like fancy Chinese food. She liked what she called peasant food, which is a lot of rice, basically fried rice. And boy, she was an incredible cook. Those are some of my fondest memories that my grandmother was cooking for, especially she made cool things that you never heard of, like cowboy coffee. So, well, that's a thing. Not the way she made it. She called it cowboy coffee because when you're a little kid, that was a cool thing. She would take a thing of coffee, instant coffee, that is, instant, all right? She poured it in some hot water and then take Eagle brand sweetened milk, that real thick stuff that makes you pucker up because it's so sweet. She'd take a spoonful of that and put it in hot water and stir it. There's really nothing coffee about it. It's just sugar and water, man. I love that stuff. Still addicted to that stuff, man. But that's the memories I have of my grandmother. But I want to show a few pictures of her in China where she grew up. So 100 years ago, she was born in China. Her mom and dad were medical missionaries. They had landed in 1916, so 104 years ago. They landed in China and Shanghai. They did not minister in Shanghai. They a place which they called in their local language Jingchengpu. Say that real quick a whole bunch of times, Jingchengpu. And today it's known as the city of Huai'an, which is north of Shanghai. It's about, we'll just say like a 2.5, maybe 3 hour drive north of Shanghai. And I've been to that city. And my grandmother, she had some fond memories there. She loved China. She wanted to be a missionary in Tibet. She always felt called to be a missionary. Matter of fact, when she met my grandfather, Billy Graham, years later at Wheaton College, they had agreed to go to Tibet to be missionaries. And one of their first major fights, they weren't married at the time, but boyfriend, girlfriend, was my granddad said, you know what, I feel the call to ministry, but after praying about it, I don't think I'm supposed to go to Tibet. And she was like, what? We're going to Tibet. And he's like, no, we're not. And he really stuck his foot down. And I said, no, I'm not called to go to Tibet. He thought he was, but after praying about it as they were dating, he said, I'm not called to do that. And so they had a little, they got a little bit angry, or she did, just kind of disappointed, but she soon learned that that was the guy that she's supposed to marry and she's supposed to follow him. And she didn't understand everything at that time, but she trusted in the Lord. And so they would end up getting married years later. And she said, God gave me more than Tibet, He gave me the whole world. But when I say this, she loved China. All right, she loved China. All her children love China. We're grateful for China. It has a huge meaning to us as a family. And so, and she grew up there. She had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. One of her brothers would end up passing away as an infant there. And so he would die. He would actually be buried in China. He was like 2 years old, I think. He would die there. And so part of my family is buried there. But they were medical missionaries. And my great-grandfather, this is my L. Nelson Bell. I never met him. He died before I was born. And so, but my grandmother in 1988, she went back 3 times to China, I think, 3 times. 1988 may have been the last time. Remember, for us as Americans, China was it was blocked off. You couldn't get to China. Matter of fact, it wasn't Nixon until about 72, after the communists took over right after World War II, and it became a communist country, that religion was outlawed basically. Religious liberty was gone, and ties with America were gone. And it wasn't really until Nixon went that the first American had gone back. And so under Nixon, so when Nixon went back, it started opening the door between China and America. And over the years, my grandmother, I think, made 3 or 4 trips to China. 1988, she took my grandfather. It was the only time my grandfather, it was his first trip to China. And so when he went to China with my grandmother, she showed him her house. This is the house that they lived in right here. It was still standing. Today it's gone. I never saw that house, but it was still there. And so she was showing him where, she played and lived, and, played with her dolls and stuff like that. The hospital was still there, the missionary hospital. It's now gone. And it was called Love and Mercy Hospital. And so what's interesting was, here's a little tidbit of a story. When my grandfather went to China for the first time, there in Huai'an, it's on a canal. And this canal, you could take it from Shanghai. It was reserved for royal family of the time, and the royal family could take the canal up. And those days are obviously long gone. And so the canal's just sitting there still. And so it's like a real skinny river, you might say. And so I've been on it, and I've gone on boat rides. So been down it, just go around and come right back into the city. Well, my grandmother and my granddaddy took this boat ride, and tens of thousands of Chinese people were coming out to the bank, and they were all waving. And my granddaddy was waving back. He looked like a politician. He was just waving to people. But my grandfather was amazed at how many people were coming out to wave at him. I mean, think about it. There's no Billy Graham books in China. There's no Billy Graham internet. They're not writing about Billy Graham crusades. My granddaddy's never a preacher. He's never been there. He doesn't have Christian radio in China, all right? There's all these things that no one knows who Billy Graham is, but they're all out there waving. And he sat there amazed. He completely said, Ruth, how come all these people are waving? How do they know who I am? I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. And she called him Bill. She leaned forward and said, Bill, they're not waving at you. And she kept waving. She's the hometown girl. These are her hometown people, all right? She knew them all. She all knew them by face. She's waving to all her friends. She knew them, and they all knew her. And because many of those people were brought into this world as babies by her dad. So they all remember her dad and how he took care of them, loved them, told them about Jesus and stuff. And so they all came out to wave at Ruth Graham, but my granddaddy thought it was at him, and she said, no, they're waving at me, honey.